Hi everyone, welcome to the Android lesson, Fragments, Part 4 example. We'll be using these tools and references for this lecture. You need to make sure that you cover this prerequisite, Fragments Part 3, before you do this lecture, otherwise you will not understand this lecture. You can find the link in the description section. You will be learning here about in this example we'll be using two fragments to create a two pane layout. So it's like two columns, I would say, or two panes, and depending on a larger screen, let's say on a landscape orientation, you will see both the panes at the same time. But if it's on a normal smaller screen on a portrait orientation, you will not see both, you will see only one, and then when you click on that you will be loading the other one. So it will be two fragments, one to show a list of items, say Shakespeare playlist. The other one is to show the summary, once you click on title. It also demonstrates how to provide different configurations of the fragments like landscape version and the portrait. And we'll be talking about adding a fragment to the activity at runtime, and also we'll be using a list fragment for this exercise. As usual, it's going to be practical demonstrations. So let's create a new Android Studio project. Let's create a empty activity. Click next. Let's give a name and a location for this. Okay, so the project got created. So let's look at the developer docs. So in the example, it talks about what we said here, and this is the main activity on create. So from the main activity on create, it's referring to a layout called fragment layout. So fragment layout.xml. So our main activity at the moment is referring to activity main.xml. So this one, so we will rename it just because we are following this. We'll rename it to fragment layout.xml just because we are following this tutorial. Refact, rename fragment layout.xml. Awesome. So XML got renamed and the activity Java file got updated. Right. So in that it's a linear layout with one fragment and a frame layout. So the fragment will be fixed, then it is the titles fragment, and then there's a frame layout which we can dynamically add fragments into the frame layout, right? So let's copy this linear layout. Let's put it to the fragment layout. Let's go to the code. So let's delete this, but keep that XML line and put it here. So I have a linear layout and I got my first fragment and then a frame layout where I can dynamically load fragments into the frame layout, right? Okay. I have an error. Will be correcting it in a little while. So it says using this layout, the system instantiates the tiles fragment which lists the play title. So we have to create it after a little while. We'll be creating. So as soon as the activity loads, so yeah, as soon as the activity loads, we are listing the titles fragment. So the titles fragment is the first one we will be displaying to the user in the app. Then the frame layout, where the fragment for showing the summary. So this frame layout will be used to show the next the other fragment, right? Okay. However, not all screen configurations are wide enough to show both the list of plays and the summary side by side. Yes, if you have a smaller screen, you can't show both of them side by side. So because of that, the above layout is mainly suitable for larger screens, also for landscape screens, portrait and landscape. So portrait means, let's see, if I take a emulator, so this is the portrait, and if I turn it, this is the landscape. So I'm just giving example. This is not the app we are developing, this is a previous app, but just I'm giving you the idea. So this is the portrait side, so it's too small to show two fragments side by side. But if it's landscape, probably we can show the two side by side, the two fragments. So that's what it's telling here, right? So because of that, this the two things displaying at the same time is more suitable for landscape fragment, right? For the landscape, it's suitable to have the fragment and the frame layout, so we can display side by side. That is more suitable for landscape orientation, right? So because of that, the above is used only for the landscape configuration, right? By saving it in resource LAN. What does that mean? That means if you remember in our previous lesson we did that. So what you have to do is now you have to go to the layout file, then go to the design, right? And if you remember our previous lesson, you have to click on the orientation for preview, then you have to click create other, and from this you have to go to the orientation, click this. Now you can say okay, you want a variation of that for landscape. So this is the standard XML. Now you are creating a variation if for layout landscape. Now you click OK. Now you will see that there's a landscape orientation created for that fragment layout.xml. So you got the normal one, then you got the and you got the landscape layout. So you want this, as this guide says, you want this only for the landscape version, right? Which is for this one, the landscape. But for the normal XML, for this one, right, on the normal layout, you can't display side by side, so you display only one fragment. So that you put inside a frame layout, right? So if I copy this straight away and go to the standard layout, not for the landscape one we will keep it like this, but we keep it like this means you will have side by side the fragment and the frame layout. But in the normal one, I will go to the code and I can't display in a smaller screen side by side. So I'm deleting this and just putting that second one. That means a frame layout and just one fragment inside that, right? Just one fragment, the same one, the first fragment what I want to display, right? So in the landscape, I'm displaying that fragment and I can display the second one also inside this frame layout. That's inside landscape, in the landscape mode. But in the normal mode, I will be displaying just inside frame layout only one fragment, right? So that's what it talks here, right? Okay, only the titles fragment, right? That's in the portrait direction, right? Now you can okay, so next you can see how this is accomplished in the fragment class. Okay, the titles fragment, right? Okay, which we are going to show the list of titles. So in this example, it's taking some Shakespeare titles, right? The fragment, see this one extends from list fragment because I want to show a list box. So if you want to show a list in a situation like this, like a menu where you can click on an item, so then it's easy for you to use a list fragment, right? Okay, as you inspect this code, you notice that there are two possible behaviors when user click a list item. So that the advantage is now the user can click an item on the list depending on which of the two layouts is active, right? Let's read this. So then because we have two configurations now, that is the landscape and the portrait, that's what it says here. When you look at this code, you will see there are two possible behaviors when the user clicks a list item. So if the user click the list item on a landscape mode, then you have to load the detail in the side by side, right, in the right, towards the right of it. But if the user is in a smaller screen, you have to show that once you click it, you have to show the details on a new screen. That's what it says. So depending on which of the two layouts is active, that means if it's a landscape or the normal portrait, it can either create and display a new fragment to show the details in the same activity. So that means in the landscape mode, because you have a larger screen, what you have to do is you have to create, when you click on an item in the list box, that means in the first fragment, when you click on an item on the first fragment which is on the list box, then you display a new fragment, right, on the same activity. You can add it to the frame layout. That means you can add it to this frame layout, this one. or you start a new activity where the fragments. So because if not, if you are in a smaller screen, you have to start a new activity to show the next fragment. So this is the tiles fragment, the titles fragment, right? Extending list fragment, right? Okay. So let's create a fragment, right? So let's right click, let's say new, let's say a fragment, right? I need a list fragment. What I will do is I will just create a blank fragment first, and I will just give that name, the titles fragment, right? And let me create finish, and then it created the titles fragment, right? So now it creates a lot of auto generated code. I'm going to delete all of them because I'm going to follow this developer doc to put the code into this. And another thing, when I created the fragment, it created the fragment.xml, right? So let's see whether we need it or not, depending on how what we do. Sometimes we will need use it, sometimes we will not use that XML. If we are not using, we will delete. Let's see how it what we do. So it extends from list fragment. So basically it's a special fragment. It's a list fragment, right? So a list fragment, so I will have to press alt enter, alt key and the enter key, and then it comes from Android X dot. Make sure you take the Android X dot fragment dot app, so that it imports it at the top. Okay, right? And then we will not worry a lot because our focus is on fragments, and this is like a news app, so don't worry about everything. Let's put these attributes, and whenever we need, we'll just refer to them, right? Anyhow, I'm just putting this. Say some attributes are there, like to display the list of news, right? Then it overrides on activity created method. So I'm going to copy that method one, and then it overrides on save instance state method. Then it overrides on list item click. That means because it's a list box, it can click the list item, and once the list item clicks, it's calling show details method. So then the show details user defined method. So I'm copying four methods, right, into this. So I just copied four methods. So what are the four methods I copied? One is on activity created, that is a life cycle method. Then second one is on save instance state, that's also life cycle method. Third one on list item click, that method comes actually from the list fragment, right? So that it's a list box, actually it's a fragment which has a list box, so I can click item on the list box, right? And then once I click item on the list box, it calls the show details user defined method to show the details inside this method only. That is where it creates the detail fragment, the second fragment, right? But once it click on the list box, right, when it's want to show the details, it has to see whether it can run on dual pane, meaning side by side. If so, you do it in one way. If not, you do show you so if you can show it side by side, you just create the second fragment and you load it using the fragment manager into the you load it uh, into the frame layout, right? But if you can't do it, that means if it's a smaller screen, right, that's what it's checking. If it's not dual pane, I will, right, then you create an intent, right, and you create a new activity, right? It's a completely new activity, and you start that activity, and from that activity you will load the second fragment. That's what this example is doing. Okay, now when I copy, I'm getting some errors, right? So one is array adapter, so I have to import the package, because when it comes to list fragments, to display the list boxes, the list box, it uses a array adapter. So I have to press alt from the keyboard, alt plus enter to import. Then it has a class called Shakespeare, so Shakespeare title. So that means I will need a normal class called Shakespeare here. So right, it's just a class, Java class, let's say Shakespeare, right? It's a Java class, okay, Shakespeare, right? And in that Java class, when you look at this, you should understand that it has titles. That means array of titles, right? So, and it's public and it's static. That's why I can use it. So when you look at it, you will understand. So I'll have to put public static string, and then I'll have to declare that string titles, right? So titles, and it's like let's say I don't know, let's say title 1, okay, for example, comma title 2. I'm just giving example, right? So title, title 3, let's say title 1 2 3. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this in a different format. So it has to be it has to be a string array, right? So string array, list of items. So now I got Shakespeare titles. So now see that error went off, right? And so on activity created inside the fragment. So these are standard methods. Set list adapter, it's a standard method in the list fragment. So that is how you create a list, right? This is the first time you see this. At this stage, when you develop mobile apps, you don't write everything from the scratch. You don't write everything word by word. You always use these developer guides, and you copy the code from the developer guides, and then you understand the code, and then you modify. That's how real world developers are doing their work. So make sure at this stage when you are developing mobile apps, as I said now, you don't write everything line by line, scratch from the scratch, because it's not possible to do it. Because when you do mobile apps, there's lots of different syntax, so you can't by heart all of them. What you do is you refer, as I'm doing now, you refer the developer docs, you copy the code, and you understand the code, and you modify the code, and then you get done what you want from that. That's the style. That's how the real world developers are working. Okay. So now, so basically this is standard. So this is where you give the data to the for the list, and then it says get activity. So for the fragment will be loaded in activity. So it gets access to the activity. Find view by id r.id.details. So if you look at that, if you look at the layout, so let's look where it is. Let's go into this. So you can see this is that is the frame layout. See the id details. So that means that it's referring to this frame layout from the titles fragment. So it's getting access to that frame layout, right? And it's checking whether that is not equal to null, right? And right, that visibility, right, is that visible? If so, it's a dual pane because you have that details frame, right? You have it. So if you have it, meaning when you run this app, it's running on a landscape mode, because if it runs on a normal mode, you will not have that details frame layout if you are running this in a normal, say, portrait mode. So this is how you check whether your app is running at the in the landscape mode or the portrait mode, right? So this helps this. If it's not null and if it's visible, that means it's running dual pane, meaning side by side. So that means it's running on the landscape mode. Now you can put a if condition and check if it's dual pane, that means you are running on a landscape mode, because that is why the details is there. The details meaning the frame layout details, the id, right? Okay, right. Okay, and it's checking if the saved instance is not null, so it's getting some it's getting the user choice, the current choice, right? So let's look into that. Get int current choice, right? So in this code somewhere it's putting it. Before we get where to put, we will look at that later. Now how you understand now, if it's dual pane, that means it can be run side by side. and then it says okay, list view. So I have to, it's a standard class, so I have to press alt enter, right? So let's click here, let's save this list view. Okay, so alt plus enter, right? So alt enter, so that when I press alt enter, what happens is it's importing, it's automatically writing the imports. That's what I do always. By when I say press alt plus enter, it imports the correct package. Awesome, right? So if so, uh, it from the list view, okay, into list view, set choice single mode, choice mode. So that means the user can select only one item from the list, and then it calls show details, and it pass the current check position, right? So this one, the current check position is passed to show details. Let's look what it is in little while. And this one, okay, see, on saved instance, into the bundle, it puts the current check position. So whatever the current position, most probably this is the position in the list box where the user has clicked, right? And when you click on it, you just show the details, you just pass the position, right? You want to show the details. So in the show details, that means when you click on the news item, you get the index. That means what item has been clicked on from the list box. That is what you put into the current check position. So the current check position is the what item is clicked on the list. That is the current check position, right? What item has been clicked. If it's dual pane, that means if it can be run side by side, that means if it's in the landscape mode. So it gets a list view and set item checked, right? So it makes the current item from selected in the list box into this index, meaning whatever the selected item, and then it's creating the details fragment. So I need a details fragment, right? So where is the details fragment? Let's look down. It's here. See, details fragment. It's a fragment. So let's create a let's create this details fragment, right? So let's right click, new fragment, blank details fragment, right? And once again, I'm going to delete this auto generated code because I'm going to follow this reference, right? So extends fragment, all good. So it creates a new instance. So let's copy this. It's creating a new instance. It takes whatever the index, right? Don't worry about this. You don't worry about understanding everything, right? On create view, okay, so if the container is null, right? So if the container is null, what is this container? So if we look here, let's see what this container is. Okay, that is a parameter, right? So it says we have different layouts. Let's read that, but yeah, let's read that a bit. Yeah, so that means in the details fragment, so because we got a landscape mode and a portrait mode, so it says we have different layouts. Yes, that means the portrait version and the landscape, and in one of them, this fragment containing frame does not exist. Yeah, so in the portrait version, you don't have the frame to contain the fragments. If you look at this, so there's no frame to contain the fragment, whereas in the landscape mode, we have the frame to contain the fragment. So the fragment may still be created from its saved state, but there is no reason to create its view hierarchy. It is not displayed. This isn't needed. I'm reading it and explaining to you. We could just run the code below where we would create and return the view hierarchy. So what it does is uh, it's checking whether we are running this, whether we are running the detail fragment on what uh, what layout, because we got two layouts, one where we can display it, the one we cannot display it. So it's tackling that using this if condition, and if it find that the container is null, that means if the container is not there to display this, it just returns null, because then no point of creating the detail fragment if we don't have this placeholder. So this detail fragment in needs has to get created here if it can be displayed. So if the container is not there to display it, right, no point of creating. That's what it does it here. If not, it creates a scroll view, it gets the activity, right, it gets the current activity, and then it creates a text view, right, and then into the text view it's adding some properties, and then it's setting the text, whatever the clicked item from the Shakespeare class, it's getting the dialog of that and it's displaying it over here. So for because of that, on the Shakespeare class I have to have a dialog list as well. So that means in the Shakespeare class I will need public static string, and then I need the dialogues, right? So for each title, right, I need to have the dialog for title 1. Okay, let's say I'm just giving example. So this I'm just giving example, this is the dialog for title 1, right, comma, I'm just giving example. Then let's say enter, and then I will copy this, right, enter and copy. So let's say title 2, dialog for title 3, right, just example, right, just the list of dialogues, right. Okay, so where were we? So give me a sec. So that means the details fragment, yeah, we were looking here actually, right, the details fragment. So don't worry about understanding everything, right? So we will first we'll do this and we'll discuss this further, right? So okay, so it adds it, right? Now let me copy this first, right, and I will explain this further. I'll explain this further, right, after this. So let's copy this, copied, and let's put this to the details fragment, details fragment. Let's put it here, right? So I got the details fragment, right? Then once again I have to press alt enter so that it imports the relevant packages, right, alt enter. So I got the details fragment also up and running, right? So I got the details fragment. I will explain this after this, right? First let's do this. So now I have the details fragment, then earlier I had the titles fragment, right? So see now from the title fragment, when it's showing the details, if it's on dual pane, that means if it can display side by side, it's creating the details fragment, right? But to create the details fragment, right, so it first it first find find view by ID, and it's getting the details, right? So get fragment manager, and then it's getting the details. So the details meaning this one, the frame layout. So it's referring to this frame layout from here, right? So one thing, when you call this method get support fragment manager, you need to call it on the activity. So you have to say get activity dot get support fragment manager, because that comes from the activity class. So you want to show the details, right? And then once again, so get support fragment manager should come from get activity dot get support fragment manager, then fragment transaction, alter enter. So I'm just correcting the errors first, then I will explain you the code, right? First, also here it's using two things. I will comment one thing, don't worry. You also do the same thing for now and put it there just for now, right? Then intent, alter, enter, right? Okay, let's save this file, save all, then the intent, right? Alter, enter. Details activity, right? So we, okay, so the details activity is another class, right? So I'm creating everything first, then I will explain you, right? So I got the details activity, which is a fragment activity, which is the second activity I told. So because if it's running on a smaller screen, that means portrait. So my second fragment, to display the second fragment, I'm using a second activity. That second activity is this one, the details activity. It is a second activity. So on this second activity is what where I'm going to show that second fragment. So don't worry about that for now. Let's create a empty activity called details activity. Let's run this first, then let's discuss this further, right? So right click, new. So for the details fragment on a portrait orientation, I'm going to use this activity. So let's say empty activity, and let's call this as the details activity. I will explain this further once this starts working. So on that, what I will do now is I will just copy this code, right? I will explain it after I finish running this, right? So first I will run this and show this to you, right? So on create, so I put this, right? So don't worry for now what I'm doing. I will explain it in detail, right? Alter, enter. Okay. So file, let's say save all, right? Okay, so I have done the basic part. So I wrote everything, right? And the code is compiling now. And let's run this first to see what's happening, right? Okay, let's run this to see what's happening. Okay, so let me run this on the tablet. Let's click run. So I'm running it on the tablet, and let's see what's happening, like what will happen on the tablet, right? Okay, so it the build succeeded, and see I'm getting uh, the list where I can click on the list, right? Okay, and still nothing happens in the right hand side. That we will investigate, right? But let's run this now on a smaller device, on a mobile smaller handset, right, on the phone. So when I run it on the phone, right, let's see what's going to happen on the device, right? So when I run, I'm getting error when I run this on the normal device. So because in our fragment layout.xml, for the normal one, see, we have to make sure we give the titles fragment here, right? So you have to make sure that you go and give it over here, right? Okay, you have to select your titles fragment. Let's run this now. So I'm running it on the device now. See, it works. So I got the list fragment in action, right? So when I click on this, it takes me to the second fragment, right? So when I click on this, it works. This is the dialog for title 3. So when I click this, it works, right? And so on a smaller screen, that means on a portrait orientation, you will see only the first fragment, which is the list fragment, and when you click on it, it loads the second activity, and that activity loads the fragment. So I will explain that code after this, but I'm checking now. So then on the tablet, if I run this on the tablet, right, so on the tablet also I'm getting an error. Let's see what it is. So let's go to the layout, same error, right? So the titles fragment, right? So we have to say com dot example dot the, what was it, the titles, fragment, right? Okay, so let's run this on the tablet now. So on the tablet, okay, see it works. When I click on this, now on the tablet it works side by side, right? Because it's a larger landscape orientation. Then if I also look at the the hand set once again. So if I run this on the handset, on the portrait orientation I will see only one, right? When I click on it, I will be taken to the second activity where it displays the second fragment. Now let's put this into landscape orientation. So when I put this into the landscape orientation, see it works. So on the landscape orientation it shows it side by side, right? So this is a very important lesson for you to use in future mobile application, and in the future apps we are developing. In this lecture we will be using this technique. Once again, if I put it back to the portrait orientation, because it has a smaller screen, it shows only one fragment, right? Okay. Okay, so we did a practical demonstration about showing how to use multiple fragments and modularize it and show side by side on a larger landscape screen, but to show only one at a time on a simple portrait screen. So we did a practical demonstration for that. So the conclusion is you got some basic idea about using two fragments to create two pane layout. One fragment to show the Shakespeare's play titles and the second one to show the summary of each title. And also it demonstrates how to provide different configurations, that means for landscape and portrait, and we use about adding activities at runtime, and we especially we use a list fragment. So you can find the code to download the link for this, right? We use the references. What's next? The next thing is we are going to detail explain this example, because though you did it, there are certain parts in this code which you are yet to understand. So in the next lesson we will take this practical what you did now and we'll explain it in detail using the APIs for you to further understand what exactly happened inside that code, right? So have a look at our other videos also. So we are very excited to see you in our next video where we explain this practical in more detail, taking line by line and explaining you what exactly happened here, because we know that there are some doubts you have at the moment. So we are very excited to see you in the next lesson to explain this. See you in our next lesson.